Well, Jordan, I actually do. I want to start this episode off with a bit of a question, which it hopefully should be pretty obvious because I'm putting you on the spot here. But what is likely the largest expense you will ever have to make in your entire life?
Oh, okay. There's two
Okay.
that I'm
Okay.
thinking of. One's going to be the main one, but the other one's kind of one like I always forget about. But now that I'm thinking about it, like you're trying to make it like sound like professional, but
you don't need.
but your shelter,
Yeah. Okay.
like that
so
that in
housing,
your retirement
right?
or you're too
Yeah.
big, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, planning for retirement and housing, right? Sheltered housing, and into you can use those words interchangeably, but and you could make the argument. I mean, actually, the amount of money that you save for retirement tends to be related to your housing, right? Like if you go to a retirement home, nursing home, all those things, those can get very expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, the answer that I was hoping that you'd give, and you did give it, is housing, right?
Yeah.
Housing tends to be for, unless you own, I guess, like your own business and something along the lines of that. Housing for the mass majority of people is going to be the largest expense that they ever make.
Yeah,
right?
and the developed like this for what? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Or maybe even make the argument. I mean, I don't know this for certain, but in areas that are still quote unquote developing,
Yeah,
there's probably a good chance that even their houses are still going to be one of their larger expenses. It might just be
expenditures.
on a different scale
Yeah.
than what we're talking about here. But
yeah, geography could play a role in that or whatever, but
yeah. And obviously there are always going to be those ongoing expenses. Maybe I should have made things a little bit more specific. The like kind of one-time expense,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, right? Like so, like food,
That's
you're going to have to
continuous.
eat for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's going to be kind of
yeah,
expensive.
that might be
right?
one of the few that runs neck and neck.
Yeah, right.
Because those are the two
but
things you need.
Yeah, right. It's those necessities, right? But in terms of like a one-time lump sum, if you're trying to buy a house right now or something like that, it's going to be the largest expense,
Yeah.
right? Cars are sometimes considered a pretty large expense, but for the price of a car, you can buy, or sorry, for a price of a house, I should say, you could buy several cars, right? So it is a quite a massive expense, and it's crazy, and we've kind of already talked about it, but that it's one of the largest expenses, but it's also something that is a necessity for us to be able to live, right? It's funny that that's the there's always, what is it, like kind of food, shelter, water, and like clothing. Would that be like
Yeah.
the four major necessities of life?
Yeah,
right?
I'd say so.
So it makes sense from a demand standpoint, right? But it's also kind of crazy that it's so important, yet
It's our largest
have a
expenditure.
huge barrier. Sorry, what was that?
It's so important, but it's like your biggest, like, yeah, it's the thing you have to worry about the most, basically.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the one thing that we're not kind of taking care of in any capacity. I apologize if anyone can hear my dog barking. I think someone came to the door. And there's no way that my wife is getting up with a 1-month-old and
Nope.
our 3-year-old. So there's a good chance that she's just going to keep barking.
That stranger's just going to think nobody's home, so it's good for everybody.
Yeah, there you go, right? But yeah, nevertheless, right? It is a pretty crazy thing that housing it's the most expensive thing, and it's up there with being one of the most important of those necessities, right? Obviously, food and water are gonna you need that even more than shelter potentially, but you get the idea.
Well, yeah, and we take it for granted a little here because of all the space we have, right?
Yeah,
We go to
for sure.
we go to Europe, and it's like it's something it's not any less important, but it's
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
but you're the
You
limitations.
can't
are
escape
even
like
greater.
the fact that it's all around you all the time, right? Whereas here,
Definitely.
you drive up north, and it's like, oh, it's nice,
You,
big.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can see some wide open spaces
Yeah.
depending on where you're looking, right? Yeah, and North America, I would argue as a whole, benefits from that, where there is some spaces that are still
Yeah, so it's like, oh, we can always
not
fit more houses kind of thing. Whereas like other places, like, where are we going to put more houses?
yeah, yeah, totally. And like I think, like, kind of going off that, right? Like, I think it's fair to say around the world, housing, like whether we're talking about Europe or we're talking about North America or parts of Asia or just everywhere, right? Housing is one of the most expensive costs that we end up facing. And even in places, well, really, like in places like where we live in Toronto and the GTA, right? Because anywhere that's a high demand area, I guess, the expense can be so great that people aren't even able to find a place to live.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you might be completely priced out of the
Well,
market.
that's, yeah, it's becoming a widespread problem. Like, not even just
Yeah.
here. Like, you got certain states are starting to have an issue with that.
Definitely. Yeah. I think if you looked anywhere in the world and said there's demand for what people to want to live there, right? Then housing is going to be that big expense issue where you can't find a house within the, like, kind of a reasonable budget relative to
What
the average
your
person's
earning
salaries.
is,
Yeah, right. And it scales differently depending on where you live, but I think the same notion is true, right? Like, you can, I don't know, go to Ireland and it'd be the same situation as it is in Toronto, right? Like I know Toronto is a city, but like whatever, Dublin, I don't know.
Yeah.
name a major city around the world, and it would be this same situation, that the surrounding areas and that metropolitan has huge housing demands, and in a lot of cases, the demand is outweighing.
We're not building them fast enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so, of course, even when you have a situation like that, and housing becomes so far out of reach, right, for people, inevitably that causes a chain reaction that really just affects society as a whole, right? Even if you are someone that has a house, if you live in an area that doesn't have enough housing, so to speak, for people to actually purchase for themselves, regardless of your own personal situation, that the impact of that lack of housing is going to affect how your kind of community works, right? And we're going to go into a lot of, like, I guess, like, details or examples and stuff like that, so I don't want to get too far into it. But yeah, I hope people right off the bat are able to see, and if you aren't, hopefully by the end of this episode you'll be able to see how whether you own a house or not, the lack of housing is going to affect how you live your life.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to today's topic, right? The idea of housing and the housing market, and in particular, why houses are so expensive, right?